Yeah, I hate to begin by starting out with an apology, but I'd be remiss if I didn't. I need to apologize to my wife. Annabelle contacted me a couple of weeks ago and asked if I would come do this, and I said, sure, I'd be pleased to. Now, I neglected to check with the commander-in-chief at home, not realizing this is the week that we're on vacation in South Carolina. So I'd like to apologize to her for leaving her at the beach and flying up here today. But, Annabelle can be very persuasive. But it really is a great pleasure to be here. This is a rhetorical question. I'm not asking for a show of hands, but just think to yourself, how many people in here are handicapped? I mean, I know I am, and I suspect everyone in here is, and I think our biggest handicap rests in this space. It's where we tell ourselves we can't do something. And I'm always inspired. I don't know if you've been watching the guy that's climbing the mountain, the guy that, I think he has multiple sclerosis, and he's pulling himself up 5 inches at a time. I'm always inspired by people that don't take no for an answer. There's too many times that, whether it's running a marathon or getting a master's degree or doing something about the sad state of the political affairs in our country, where we just tell ourselves we can't do it. And when you tell yourselves you can't, you don't try. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that we fail. Well, I was really disillusioned with the political process. As Trent mentioned, I worked on Capitol Hill for a while. There's a thing they do every year. It'll happen again in January of this year. When there's a new Congress that comes in, they take their oath of office, they put them on a train, they take them off to Williamsburg, and they spend 3 days at a new member's orientation. And it's kind of like basic training for members of Congress, where they learn the important things. Like if you're talking to the empty gallery, you want to look up because that's where the camera is, and you're filming this for the folks back home, not because you're really talking to your colleagues. But at that orientation in January of 2009, with all the new members of Congress, it was heartening to hear them talk about how they were going to be different, that this partisanship stuff was going to come to a halt, that they were the new freshman class and they were going to be different and they were going to work together. And they went back the next week and they all voted in line with their party. So it was disillusioning working on the Hill and seeing the political process not work. And I felt like there was nothing that I could do. I felt handicapped. And then I picked up the paper and I saw where Annabelle was organizing the coffee party, and there was a meeting in Prince William County, Virginia, near where I lived. So I decided to go. And I thought when I went there'd be a group of people there that looked like the last panel sitting here, a bunch of young folks. But instead there were about 35 people that showed up, and a third of that group were people that looked like me. They had gray hair and they'd probably put on a few pounds over the years, and a third of the group were veterans. So it was heartening to see that if you get past that handicap of I can't and there's nothing one person can do, that there is something that we can do about it. I was really perturbed with the other side, the far right, hijacking the term patriot. I mean, I felt like I served in the military for 25 years, and for somebody like Dick Cheney, who had 5 deferments and did everything humanly possible to avoid serving, it really bothered me that if you're with us, you're a patriot, and if you're not, then what are you? Are you unpatriotic if you're not one of them? And I got tired of this us and them stuff. Be one of us, be a patriot. We don't want them, whether it's the mosque or gays in the military, we don't want them. It's a government it's we the people. There's no us and them, it's we, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So it was heartening to get involved and try to take back for the people the government. So Annabelle mentioned not too long afterwards when we were talking if I would write an article. Those of you that are my age may remember the old Edward R. Murrow, This I Believe segment that NPR picked up a couple of years ago. So Annabelle said, why don't you write an essay for This I Believe? So I did. And that was back in, I guess, March or April. And I'd forgotten that I had sent the thing in until a couple of weeks ago. I had an email back from This I Believe saying, we published your essay. And so that was when I had contacted Annabelle and she invited me down. So let me just read you a short essay. And it was entitled Perfecting a More Perfect Union. My father, and this is a picture of him, my father was a 100% disabled veteran of World War II. He left home a healthy man in the prime of life and returned seriously disabled by a broken back he suffered during a training accident at Fort Bragg. And what happened was he was in the back of a truck, and it went off the edge of the road, and it was full of troops in the back, and it rolled down an embankment, and everybody else was thrown clear, but he landed under the truck, and it landed on top of him and broke his back. My earliest memories of my father was going to the Bowman Gray Hospital at Wake Forest University for multiple surgeries, spending weeks at home in bed in a full-body plaster cast, his back and leg braces and crutches, and the hand controls that let him drive without using the gas or the brake. And like many of his generation, and like many of my generation, the men and women I see now at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, there was never a word of bitterness over what he lost, only pride in his country and a bond with others who served in defense of democracy. Robert Hutchins, the former dean of the Yale Law School and chancellor of the University of Chicago, said, "The death of democracy is not likely to be an assassination from ambush. It'll be a slow extinction from apathy, indifference, and undernourishment." I believe that living in a democracy is a privilege, not a right, and each citizen has a duty to do his or her part to ensure the privilege isn't lost to future generations. That was a lesson I learned from my father at a very early age. I joined the Air Force a few months after he died, and I served for 25 years, in part because of the example that he had set. Volunteers for military service aren't apathetic or indifferent about democracy. They pledge to support and defend the Constitution, and many make the ultimate sacrifice. I saw proof of that every morning when I drove by the white stone markers aligned in rows at Arlington National Cemetery on my way to work at the Pentagon. We owe them a duty to do more than just passively surrender to the challenges we face. We have an obligation to participate in working towards solutions. It says something when we cast nearly as many votes to select the next American Idol as we do to select the next American president. When more can name the +8 that belong to John and Kate than the 8 members of the Supreme Court remaining when Justice John Paul Stevens, who I'd note is a Navy veteran, retired. And when more know about Tiger Woods wrecking his marriage in his SUV, and that's the lead story on the national news. Too many of us are too absorbed with the superficial world of celebrities and the schadenfreude of their calamitous lives. The most basic duty of citizenship is participation, something Americans do less than citizens of most other countries. Almost all eligible voters in Australia, about 95%, cast ballots in national elections. Typically, a little more than half of eligible voters in the U.S. do the same, and that's a sad fact. There's no excuse for being uninformed on issues, and there's no excuse for not voting. In my view, you forfeit the right to pontificate if you're too lazy to participate. I'm involved in the Coffee Party, a group that promotes civil discussion about issues and greater public participation in the political process. I don't believe any political party or any group along the ideological spectrum has a monopoly on good ideas, and I believe we should be able to discuss ideas and issues without hurling insults and threats. We seem to have lost sight of the fact that we're all in this together. We have the power and the ability to prove Hutchins wrong and to advance the ideals of the Founding Fathers, what they had envisioned, continuing to perfect the Union, doing justice, ensuring domestic tranquility, providing for the common defense, promoting the general welfare, and passing those privileges along to those that follow, if we just have the will. So that was what I wrote in the essay. And I guess what I really believe is, I think it's a shame. I did an article last week on Huffington Post that was entitled "Treating Kids Like Dogs, If Only." It was an article I wrote after reading, if you live in D.C., you may recall, well, let me back up a bit. Vernon Hill is the CEO of a major corporation. He grew up in Northern Virginia, not far from where I live. He and his wife and their little one, Duffy, live in a 50,000 square foot house in New Jersey that's one of the largest homes in America. Little Duffy had some bad teeth and went to the dentist and had the teeth pulled. And Vernon had insurance that paid for it, $2,400, so little Duffy could get his teeth fixed. DeMonte Driver was a 12-year-old kid that many of you that live in the D.C. area may recall, had a tooth that got infected. It would have cost $80 to remove his tooth, but he'd lost his Medicaid coverage. The tooth got infected. He had 2 brain surgeries after the infection spread to his brain, and he died because he didn't have insurance. And it's a sad state of affairs in this country when a rich man's dog has better health care than a poor woman's son. Another thing that I think that we've lost sight of is that government is not the enemy. You know, it's government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And we need to take responsibility for it and take the government back. It belongs to us. What I think we ought to do, I mean, I agree, I'm not for big government. What we need is a top-to-bottom review of the government. I mean, creating a new organization is hard. Dismantling one is impossible. But if you've ever worked in government, you know there's a lot of fat in the government. And I think what we need, if we try to do it piecemeal, it's not going to work. But like we did in the military, we had base closure, where a nonpartisan committee got together, reviewed the whole process, and then it was an up or down vote on the whole thing. And I think that's what it's going to take to right-size government. As Quasi mentioned, I think campaign finance is just an imperative. It's no longer a government by, for, and of the people. The average member of Congress has to raise $25,000 a week to keep their job. Now, I don't know about you, for me, that would be a full-time job, trying to generate that kind of income. If they're representing the people, you know, the average, if you look at society as a whole, 1 out of every 100 Americans is a millionaire. On Capitol Hill, it's 1 out of every 2. And we wonder why ordinary people don't get the representation that they deserve. So we need to find some way to get big money out of government and give it back to the people where it belongs. As Trent mentioned, in my current job, I'm the executive director of the Crimes of War Project. And it's a group that was formed back in the late 90s by a group of journalists who thought, when they saw the atrocities that happened in Kosovo, that if people understood that warfare is just not unconstrained violence, that there are rules that apply, you won't stop war, but hopefully you can reduce the damage, you know, to the innocent parties that are around where armed conflicts take place. This country, you know, we hold ourselves out as being the champion of the rule of law. But we've had multiple judges and people from both parties that have said we tortured people. That's one reason I resigned as chief prosecutor for the military commissions, when I was being pressured to use evidence obtained by waterboarding, a practice that I think most reasonable human beings would agree is torture, that we were going to use that as evidence to convict someone and then sentence them to death. I think that's wrong. I heard on NPR, I haven't read the book yet, there's a new book out because, the title of the book is Because It Is Wrong. It's written by Charles and Gregory Freed, a father and a son. One is a conservative, one is a liberal, but they both agree that torture is wrong. So we're very good about lecturing other countries, the North Koreans, the Iranians, anybody we're mad at about they've got to respect the rule of law. But we're setting a poor example ourselves when we have the torture convention and the torture statute, and we've had multiple people say that we tortured, and we've done absolutely nothing about it. So just in closing, let me say, you know, I started out by saying, you know, who's handicapped? I'd say I'm very proud of everyone here. I think, you know, you've done a lot more than a lot of our fellow citizens have done by being here today, by getting out, by getting involved and taking that first step to taking our government back and putting it back in the hands of the people.